Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopichandra Vallabha Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Gopichandra Vallabha Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Yasodanandana Jaya Brajajandaranjana Brajajandaranjana Jaya Jamundhatira Brahmachari Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Jamundhatira Brahmachari Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Gopichandra Vallabha Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Girivardhari Gopichandra Vallabha Jaya Girivardhari Girivardhari Jaya Yasodanandana Jaya Brajajandaranjana Brajajandaranjana Jaya Jamundhatira Brahmachari Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Jamundhatira Brahmachari Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Jamundhatira Brahmachari Jaya Kunja Kunja Bihari. Jai Vishapad Paramahamsa Prabhupada Śrīmad His Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder-Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Śrīmad Bhāgavatam Morning Ki Jai. Gaura Pramanandi Hare Hare Om. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 25, The Characteristics of King Puranjana. Text number 17. Puryastu Bhayo Bhavane Divya Druma Latakule Nadhalvi Hangali Kula Kolahala Jalashaye Puryastu Bhayo Bhavane Divya Druma Latakule Nadhalvi Hangali Kula Kolahala Jalashaye Puryastu Bhayo Bhavane Divya Druma Latakule Nadadvi Hangali Kula Kola Halal Jalashaye. Anyone else? Puriya, of that town, to then Bharya Upavane, in an outside garden, Divya, very nice, Druma, trees, Lata, creepers, Akule, filled with, Nadat, vibrating, Vihanga, birds, Ali, bees, Kula, groups of, Kolahala, humming, Jala Ashahe, with a lake. On the outskirts of that city were many beautiful trees and creepers encircling a nice lake. Also surrounding that lake were many groups of birds and bees that were always chanting and humming. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Since the body is a great city, there must be various arrangements such as lakes and gardens for sense enjoyment. Of the various parts of the body, those which incite sexual impulses are referred to here indirectly. Because the body has genitals, when the living entity attains the right age, be he man or woman, he becomes agitated by the sex impulse. As long as one remains a child, he is not agitated by seeing a beautiful woman, although the sense organs are present. Unless the age is ripe, there is no sex impulse. The favourable conditions surrounding the sex impulse are compared here to a garden or a nice solitary park. When one sees the opposite sex, naturally the sex impulse increases. It is said that if a man in a solitary place does not become agitated upon seeing a woman, he is considered to be a Brahmachari. But this practice is almost impossible. The sex impulse is so strong that even by seeing, touching or talking, come into contact with, or even thinking of the opposite sex, even in so many subtle ways, one becomes sexually impelled. Consequently, a brahmachari or sannyasi is prohibited to associate with women, especially in a secret place. The sastras enjoin that one should not even talk to a woman in a secret place, even if she happens to be one's own daughter, sister or mother. The sex impulse is so strong that even if one is very learned, he becomes agitated in such circumstances. If this is the case, how can a young man in a nice park remain calm and quiet after seeing a beautiful young woman? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Agyantiranjasya Jananjana Salakaya Chakshuram Meditanjana Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So we, putting this verse into context, we're discussing King Puranjana, and we know that Puranjana is a Sanskrit word indicating the body and the occupier of the body. So this verse, therefore, this whole section, this whole story presented by Narada Muni is a expansion of the teachings that we get in the Bhagavad Gita about this essential aspect of knowledge, because Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita that knowledge consists of this. The field of activities which is the body, and the knower of the field of activity. So there are 8,400,000 different species of life, and each of them has a particular body, and each individual soul, that body is their field of activities. And they are, because they're a spirit soul, they're different from the body, which is like a dress, which can be changed. One can go from one species of life to another. So that knower of the body is the eternal spirit soul, but there are two knowers in the body, and the other knower is the super soul, who is the knower of all bodies. He is omnipresent, the Supreme Lord, and he is the... So although in one sense the living entity, the spirit soul, is being the knower of the body and being superior to matter, he is acting as the Purush, or the enjoyer, although that's somewhat a false position, because the actual enjoyer is the super knower, or the Supreme Lord, who is the actual proprietor. And actually the living entity is in fact the enjoyed, or one of the energies of the Lord, all of which are expanding the unlimited bliss of the Supreme Lord. So, so one should know the field of activities, the knower of body, consisting of the soul and the Supreme Soul, and understand that actually the Supreme Soul is the actual enjoyer and the actual proprietor, and the Spirit Soul is somewhat has a little knowledge of the field of activities and a little ownership. And so this is described in many different places. So, for instance, in the Bhagavad Gita, another analogy which helps to understand is mentioned in in text 14 of the 5th chapter, it describes Na Kachitvam na Kamini Lokasya Shadiji Prabhu Na Kama Pala Samjogam Sabhavastu Pravartate. The embodied spirit, master of the city of his body. So again, we're seeing this analogy that the body, which, as I say, this whole Bhagavatam chapter is expanding this understanding that we can compare the body to a city. So now, he's called the master of the city of his body, the Prabhu. As we said, but there is a higher Prabhu, that's the super soul, the real Prabhu. That master of the city of the body does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of material nature. So therein we see that many concepts there, but the initial thing to understand is that the body can be compared to a city, and that helps us to see our position. So for instance, all of us have a home in the city of Melbourne, and we understand that we may rent a property, some of us may even own a property, but ultimately it's the government who owns everything and controls everything. Okay? So, if they decide they're going to put a freeway through your home, you have to move. And you have to sell. For instance, in the Middle East, we see that for decades, centuries. Someone says, well, this part of Syria, I have my home here, And then someone comes in, the government says, oh, we're the government, you all have to move out. And they just have to leave in the hundreds of thousands. And they can never come back. Some of them, they let them come back. And then another government comes in. Now we're the owners. You all get out. And they all get out. And then sometimes they let them back in. And another government comes. You all get out. So, this body is like that. It is a city, but there is a supreme proprietor, and when he says get out, you have to get out. And that is called death. So, so therefore we have a certain amount of control. But now the interesting thing is that in the Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter, text 27, under the influence of false ego and in ignorance, because we're all in ignorance, born in ignorance, we don't know the difference between the body and ourself. We take ourself as the body, they're one thing. We don't know that there is a soul that is transmigrating from one body to another according to one's desires and karma. We don't know that. And we also, even if some try to have some inkling that the self is different from the body, they may not exactly know the nature of the self. Some may think that, as the body deteriorates and dies, then another body will grow and our self will be that body. As if the self may come back, but it's like a different self as a result of a different body. So, there are many different philosophies. People don't really understand that the soul is quite amazing, very difficult to understand. But very difficult to understand is the difference between the self and the supreme self. So these things we're in complete ignorance of, and generally we just, in this world, identify ourselves with this material body, whatever this, whichever body the soul ends up, we understand that I am this body, and I am acting independently. That a dog is thinking that I am barking and chasing away, intruders into my territory. And they mark out their territory in the way that they do. In my territory, anyone who comes into here, so the dogs, I'm performing this activity. But in the same way, actually, that the dogs are performing that activity, if a human identifies with the body, they're no better than the dog. That I am performing this activity independently. Like this is like that. But now, this, the previous verse to that, we read verse 14. But in the 5th chapter, again, text 8 and 9, it describes that a person in the divine consciousness, so one who knows that they're not the body but the soul, although engaged in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving about, sleeping and breathing, always knows within himself that he actually does nothing at all, because while speaking, evacuating, receiving or opening or closing his eyes, he always knows that only the material senses are engaged with the objects and that he is aloof from them. That's quite concept actually that we identify with the body, but actually the body is a machine that we are within. That machine is a product of the material energy, which is acting under the control of the Supreme Lord, and therefore we are not doing anything, just the material energy is doing everything. So, this, so that takes a bit of meditation, doesn't it? Because I lift my arm, I think, I've just lifted my arm. So, in cooperation with Krishna, we can do something under the influence of the spiritual energy, or by not cooperating with Krishna, we do something under the influence of the material energy. So, according to one's desires, one will enter one of 8,400,000 different species of life, and according to the body one enters, that body is completely controlled by the laws of material nature. One must act in a particular way. So a dog may be thinking, I am independently barking and chasing away my rivals, but actually, because he's taken birth in the body of a dog, which is given by the material nature, he must do that. The material energy is actually, enacting those activities. He must. He has no. He's thinking, I am doing this independently, but he has no choice. Once you take birth in the body of a dog, you will bark like a dog, and do all the things that dogs do. So, of course, there is a little independence. But very little. There's a little independence, there's something, but very little. By and large, one is forced to act according to the situation one is in. So there are 8,400,000 different species of life, and according to one's desires, one is placed into those. So at the beginning of this chapter described that the desires are unlimited. Srila Prabhupada says there's at least 8,400,000 different desires. But then, so for instance, in the body of a dog, so amongst the 8,400,000 different types of desires, that is one desire will get you into the body of a dog. But then there are many different varieties of dogs. Some like you've got your border collie. The border collie likes to run more. Some like to just sit more, like that. Some like to chase other animals like your, blue heelers and what have you. Some, a little bit savage, like the wolves. So, the desires vary. So there's at least 8,400,000 species, but then that expands, so as it says, it's pretty much unlimited. So, but what is unique is that in each of the 8,400,000 different species of life, there's 4 things that they all do in common. Doesn't matter whether they take birth. Sometimes, as Prabhupada says, he's writing his books and he sees a little dot. You think it's a full stop, but it starts walking around the page. This tiny little spot, and you realize, that's a living entity. That living entity also has 4 propensities, which is eating. That little insect, which is about the size of a dot, will eat. It will rest or sleep. Defend itself. In other words, try to make a secure position. Do I stay on the folding pages? Or perhaps go to the edge? And sex life, reproduction. That's common within all the different species of life. In fact, if you look at all the different 400,000 different species of life, you see that their entire lives revolve particularly around reproduction. So much effort. Their whole cycle of life culminates in reproducing the species. Like that. So you see, for some animals, to find a mate, to reproduce, it takes up so much energy, so much struggle, so much danger. But there is some, above all things, it impels them to the greatest degree above all things. So basically sex life, in all species of life, to one degree or another, is the most impelling force. So, so therefore, here, Srila Prabhupada describes that, here, this city, on the outskirts of the city, there are many beautiful trees and creepers encircling a nice lake. Surrounding the lake were many groups of birds and bees. They're always chanting and humming. So it's describing that, as it says here, so of the various parts of the body, those which incite sexual impulses are referred to here indirectly. The favourable conditions surrounding the sex impulse are compared here to the garden or a nice solitary park. When one sees the opposite sex, naturally the sex impulse increases. So, in all species of life, they have their mating rituals. They're quite bizarre, some of them. They're quite spectacular, some of them. But, they... the peacocks, the display of the feathers, and some birds puff up their chest, and there's singing and so many things, in a particular season and what have you. So it's very similar. And for some living in the ocean, it's when the moonlight, the certain days of the moon, that just sets them all off by the millions. They just can't control themselves, and even corals and what have you. So, this, in human form of life, which we're most concerned with because we're human, so we can actually sit and hear this. So, unlike the little creature that walks around the page of the Bhagavatam, we can actually enter into the understanding of the Bhagavatam. And the other, so that little speck, he may be, walking around the Bhagavatam and think, oh, he's so, he must know the Bhagavatam really well. He's probably walked on every page. But actually there's nothing. There's no concept of even the page, the writing or anything like that. There's a little food there, eat that. If you meet another little spot somewhere, oh, this could be interesting. So eating, sleeping, mating, defending. That's he wanders around the Bhagavatam and all he thinks is eating, sleeping, mating, defending. Little creature. But we, of course, we can hear the Bhagavatam, and we can actually, take that transcendental knowledge and get out of the bodily concept of life. So, this, therefore, because in the, life is in all societies organised in such a way as to control the sex urge for peace and within society, because if we perform actions in this world, as we've said, because the body is literally under the control of the material energy, which is controlled by Krishna, if we engage in activities, we will get a material reaction. And therefore, any sinful activities, eating things we shouldn't eat, intoxication, gambling, illicit sex, so many things, will incur some suffering. So, that was also described there, that we discussed that how is it that one in the divine consciousness, they understand that they're doing so many things with the body, but actually they're not doing anything. The next verse describes that one who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results to the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful reaction as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. And further on it also describes that the steadily devoted soul attains unadulterated peace because he offers the result of all activities to me, whereas a person who is not in union with the divine, who is greedy for the fruits of his labour, becomes entangled. So the activities that we perform with the material body, they actually create a material reaction, and they also, one desire produces so many other desires, and that produces our next body, and therefore we must suffer birth, death, old age and disease. So the in human form of life, the activities that we perform, one may not necessarily be self-realized, but the scriptures regulate our activities so we're actually elevating and moving towards a level of existence where we're not increasing the suffering and the entanglement in the material world. So therefore, sex life is regulated. Otherwise, in this material body, unregulated material activities will produce the next body, and it just goes on unlimitedly. So it is and above all things, as it describes here, that this sex life is so difficult to control. Prabhupada says, when one sees the opposite sex, naturally the sex impulse increases. It is said that if a man in a solitary place does not become agitated upon seeing a woman, he is to be considered a Brahmachari. But this practice is almost impossible. So, therefore, above all things, eating, sleeping, mating and defending, as we said, the primary activity is this, for animals, reproduction, which is sex life. And for humans, humans of course even disregard the whole process of reproduction. They actually just, captured by the sex desire itself. And this is very, very entangling and of course very, very sinful. So, we see that what people will do, that sex life is so captivating that people will engage in the most abominable, risky, sinful, degraded, harmful, vicious activities if somehow or another it increases their ability to have sex life. So here it's describing that there are certain things which, for all species and humans, so humans, like any other animal, if they're not God conscious, they create external facility which, helps to impel sex life, both for themselves and for the person they're trying to incite to, sex life. So, for instance, we're coming up to, as an example, we're coming up to the Melbourne Cup. Right? So, if you see advertisements for the Melbourne Cup, it's 90% fashion show. Right? It appears it's hardly about the horses. It's about going there and seeing beautiful women dressed up, the most beautiful women dressed up in the most beautiful clothing. All sorts of foods which shouldn't be eaten. Music, they have some of the best. They invited Taylor Swift to come and sing there, but she wouldn't do it because of the sinful activity involved. But they, it's all of this activity and money, say obscene amounts of money, won and spent. They're very attractive, for people. So it's all, basically the, like here, what is conducive for sex life, like that. But to do that, they will engage in the most sinful activities. So, actually the whole racing industry, like previously, the greyhound industry, was shut down completely because the cruelty, they were using live rabbits to train the greyhounds, and they'd catch them and tear them to pieces, so many things. And plus the cruelty to the dogs themselves. So now that's happening with the racing industry. A lot of it is coming out now, well-timed, the activists, animal liberationists, just before the Melbourne Cup, that what they've discovered is that they've suspected this for a long time, but now they have the proof that basically, they breed, perhaps 14,000 racehorses per year or something, which is a phenomenal amount. So then they have this policy which come about through also the greyhounds because, when they're not wanted, they basically kill them off. So with the horses, they have what's called horse wastage. Horse wastage means that when you've run a horse for 3 or 4 years and it can't, it's not going to run anymore, or it may have a season and you can sell it off to someone who then will have to get rid of it. So then, what to do with the horses they just don't want? There's 14,000. Now, in the statistics, there's about 5,000 a year which just disappear. All right? And this is the new controversy, because what they've found is that these horses are ending up in the abattoirs. Yeah. And so what happens is that, rather than keep the horse and eat the good grass, which the new horses could eat, and so many things, and feed them and look after them and pay all the veterinary costs and what have you. Although it's written in the rules of racing, they must, as a result of the greyhound scandal, in horse racing as well, they must look after these animals for the rest of their life. They actually must be cared for. So, but what they're finding is that they're actually listed on the computer as active in racing, and yet they've actually been dead for a long time. They've actually been taken to the slaughterhouse. And of course they have these, the animal liberationists are very, very expert. They've got all these films of the, inside the slaughterhouse, and they filmed their brand, and they can name literally the horses. They can, because it's branded on them and chipped and everything, and so they can just say this is this racehorse, this is that one. So they've so much. So that's a big scandal, but so much sinful activity, so much cheating. I think if anyone who is going to the races once saw that the horses that they're watching to facilitate nice sex life and, fashion and beauty and eating so many, probably next year that'll be sent to the slaughterhouse. The journey to the slaughterhouse is excruciating, and some of them end up underneath a whole lot of horses, and they're basically, they have to drag them out by the head. Then they get them into the slaughterhouse, and of course they sometimes have to, shoot them 4 or 5 times, and in between that, they prod them with in the genitals actually. They, sometimes in the anus with electric shocks, and they beat them and swear at them and stuff like that. And kick them and so many things. All these things on film. If people saw that this is the sinful activity that supports my enjoying my senses for one outing, go on an outing once, and that horse, that's its fate, so I can enjoy like that. So very, very sinful. But the people who so therefore there's so much cover-ups and so many things. So it's very, very demoniac. As Prabhupada said, I was listening to a lecture a couple of weeks ago, and Prabhupada said, currently the world is being ruled by, the various countries of the world being ruled by Rakshasas. So, but the point is, how much, sinful activity, how much trouble one will go, how can people give up their sex life when they're doing this sort of activity to just increase their chances of better sex life? That's what they do. That's the sort of thing that they would, that's the extent of what they would do, even as so-called civilized humans, to facilitate a little sense gratification. And you ask them to give it up. They'll lie, they'll cheat, they'll steal, they'll kill. So many things. So, so that's why Prabhupada says, it's not possible. But as we see in the Śrīmad, in these verses of the again, if you see the verses of this same 5th chapter, that describes that in verse 23. 22, it describes that an intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery which are due to contact with the material senses, O son of Kunti. Such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. So, by hearing the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, we come to our senses that actually, just like so many different species of life, we've got this body which is a machine which is being controlled by the material energy, and if we're not careful how we act in this life, it will produce another material body within those 8,400,000 different species. Even taking birth as a human, as we see on this planet, is very, very risky. There's billions and billions of human beings. I would be terrified to take birth in that place, in that body, on this planet right now. And but it describes that the liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. So actually, what we hear from the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam is that if we turn our attention to the proprietor of the body, the actual owner and permitter of the body, that we can actually live in a transcendental loving relationship with that personality of Godhead. And then all our activities, although we're acting with the body, the mind and the words, if we don't identify with the body, but we identify as the soul acting for the purpose of serving the personality of Godhead, although the body is acting, actually we have nothing to do with the action or the reaction. And one enjoys transcendental pleasure within. So, for instance, just like Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada followed in the footsteps of Arjuna, that he only acted for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord and his representatives. And you can just imagine Srila Prabhupada's transcendental pleasure as he acted to give this knowledge. Bhagavad Gita, Śrīmad Bhāgavatam all over the world, and saw temples coming up and books going out and prasadam going out and people being liberated. We can barely, understand that transcendental pleasure having and always being accompanied by Krishna, the personality of Godhead, just like Arjuna. Arjuna, from even from childhood, his life consisted in pleasing Krishna, his friend. And he acted as an instrument in the hands of his friend. And Krishna, that relationship between the Supreme Soul, as we said, there are two knowers in the body. That also within the body is the Super Soul. And he actually directs the wanderings of all living beings, especially and directly directs the activities of the devotees. So like Arjuna, Krishna was personally on his chariot. Throughout the course of Arjuna's whole life, whenever he had to make decisions or whenever there was big milestone events, his marriage, this, that or the other, Krishna was there at every step directing Arjuna, helping him to get this, enjoy life to the fullest extent. As we see in the Bhagavad Gita 9:22, Prabhupada says that for those who are fully devoted to me, I personally carry what they lack and preserve what they have. And Srila Prabhupada says a devotee should never think, if they serve Krishna, engage in devotion, that there will ever be any scarcity or unhappiness. If one takes to the service of Krishna, there will always be abundance and transcendental bliss. That's what we see. That's what we see in the life of Srila Prabhupada and the Acharyas and the devotees. So that is this body, which is a machine, is also sometimes compared to, you have the five senses are compared to 5 horses. And those, which is, very interesting, because the body is like the chariot, the horses are the 5 senses, the reins are the mind, the driver is the intelligence, and the soul is the passenger. Although there's another passenger, that's the unseen friend, that's Krishna, there's another passenger. And but those 5 senses, it's very interesting. Usually we just think of the body, it's the whole thing. But actually, you really have to think of it in terms of the senses, because, one horse may lead the others, or one horse may be a bit defective. The body, you have to really look at it. So, and in human form of life, especially, all 5 horses are very powerful and very active. But the driver, which is like the intelligence, is taking control of the mind, which is directing the senses. That's the proper way. Otherwise, for those who are dictated by the senses, the horses are pulling away at the reins, and the driver has lost control, and the chariot is going over a cliff. But we see that Krishna took the reins of Arjuna's chariot. So, in other words, when one takes direction of the scripture, it is just like Krishna taking the reins of the chariot for Arjuna. He becomes our intelligence. In other words, that's what's called becoming one with Krishna. He has his individuality, we have our individuality, but Krishna actually personally assists. They're both in the same chariot, and Krishna is personally taking, where do you want me to go, Arjuna? Take me here, in the battle of Kurukshetra. Krishna is following the instructions of Arjuna. You take me here, take me here, take me like that. And he is doing it very expertly. But if there's any danger, because he's a personality of Godhead, he's also has, he can protect Arjuna. So this is our position. Although Krishna allows us that little independence to use our own intelligence in the service of Krishna in a very individual way, but as also the driver of the chariot of our body, by giving us intelligence, he is always, we're working with him hand in hand. And that transcendental friendship in spreading Krishna consciousness, that joy is what the transcendentalists seek. And although they're engaged with the body, mind and words, they're actually completely liberated even within this body. So I'll just leave it there if anyone has any questions or comments about any of that. Yep.
Just commenting like you were saying about the horse races and it's coming up this time of year. Sometimes I have to drive them through this. That's my worst. Like I hate that the most. Because it's such a illusory kind of mood and it's like the voice kind of people like
Yeah. The material world, its nature is very entangling, and therefore we really have to take shelter of Krishna's intelligence, that we can, look after the body, because we don't need to neglect the body. We look after our body, make preparations for family if we're doing that, need income. But to do that and not be entangled, we must take direction from Krishna and the devotees. We never ever stop hearing from Krishna and the devotees. Otherwise, the nature of the material world, without Krishna giving that direction, as you can see, we're just trying to earn an honest living or something, and we just become implicated in this Kali Yuga sinful activity somehow or another. So, yeah, it's very important to always be hearing. And, as Prabhupada said, the idea is to catch the fish. So we have these fish in the pond, not that we're going to eat them. We might want to catch some fish and put them in our pond. Sometimes the birds come and eat them all. We have to get some more. The idea is to catch the fish and not get wet. Sometimes you have to take the fish out to clean the pond. I noticed there was a dead bird there the other day. Might still be there. But sometimes we have to take the fish out and clean out the pond. The idea is to catch the fish and not get wet. So the idea is to do your work, not get implicated. Don't be attracted. So,
Krishna says in the third chapter that the nature of the soul is to be active.
yes.
Everything starts from there. Because the nature of the soul is to be active, he has to act
Yep.
and bring about reactions.
That's right. And, therefore, we've got to act, but in a liberated way. There's some really nice statements, just very briefly, just to summarise. I just want to mention something here about liberation. How quickly we can actually come to that point by the grace of hearing from Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. As if I can get it. One thing, well, let's see. I can't remember exactly where I read that, but no, here. Purport to 442, yeah. 4th chapter, text number 42. Really nice sentence by Srila Prabhupada. Now, it says, the Lord is definitely the supreme person and his activities are transcendental. One who understands this is a liberated person from the very beginning of his study of Bhagavad Gita. Such a nice instruction. So even Prabhupada says, if you just hypothetically accept it, you don't fully understand it, but you've got to read the Gita in that line that Krishna is the supreme person of Godhead. Not that we are one with God, that, you know, we are supreme. There is a personality of Godhead. His name is Krishna, and he is supreme. If you read the Bhagavad Gita in that way, from the very beginning of your study of the Bhagavad Gita, you are liberated. And Prabhupada clarified that one time in Hyderabad in 1974. He said that, what did you say? He said, he said, if you know Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, you immediately jump forward in your liberation 50%. So then he gives a percentage. Right? So you're liberated from the beginning if you read Bhagavad Gita except you're the authority, Krishna, so I'm reading this from the Supreme Authority and I'm reading it like that. No interpretation, what you've said, that's good enough. From the very beginning that you study the Gita, you're liberated, and as soon as you, not hypothetically, but you're saying, yes, there is a God, Krishna is that Supreme Person, I've got it, immediately jump forward 50%. Liberated. So it's not that hard. It all comes down to hearing. Hearing and constantly purify the heart. And that is bhakti, means that the senses become purified and engage in the master of the senses. Jaya. Srila Prabhupada ki jaya. Hare Krishna.